politics and pathogens. We talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the weekly program on state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on Capitol View is Charlie Wheeler, Professor Emeritus from the Public Affairs Reporting Program at University of Illinois Springfield. Welcome.
Thank you.
And usually we have another guest, but with events as of late, journalists are in short supply. We've been doing lots of things other than worrying about politics. I'm speaking, of course, of the coronavirus, which is now, I think, on pretty much everybody's mind here in Illinois and across the nation. Locally here in Springfield, just this morning, the St. Patrick's Day parade was officially canceled by the city just one day after the city said, yes, it's going to be a go. This occurred, we are all told, after Governor J.B. Pritzker had a conversation with Mayor Jim Langfelder of Springfield and expressed some concerns. Any number of things are happening now every 20 minutes or so. If you're a reporter, your email is burning up with new news. Just as I was leaving to tape this, it was announced that the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library will apparently be closed or have some sort of reduction in hours. Charlie, how precedented or unprecedented is this sort of a situation in your experience?
Well, I would say in my experience, it's unprecedented. We've never had a situation, for example, that I know of during my adult lifetime when there's been a ban on having rallies at the Capitol, or when the General Assembly has seriously considered maybe trying to do legislation by remote.
Sure.
Or when there's the St. Patrick's Day parades have been called off, not just here in Springfield, but in Chicago, Dublin, Ireland, of all places, Boston, New York.
Cedar Rapids, it's not just the biggies.
Well, I'm thinking of places that have a significant Irish population and are known for that.
Yeah.
The NBA abruptly ends its season, and NHL does the same thing. That's never occurred in my lifetime. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know what happened in World War II because I was a baby at that time.
Major League Baseball, I think, went on. So, well, I can't really remember. They had the. I wasn't around, but it wasn't the league that it was before.
No, and as a matter of fact, I believe it was in 1944 when all the top players were in the Army, or a lot of them, that the St. Louis Browns won their only American League pennant, and they lost to the Cardinals in the World Series.
Well, you know, some things never change. Yeah, I mean, the legislature, the General Assembly is out, and nobody really knows for sure when they're going to come back. Is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean,
well, it is in the sense that there are a lot of pressing issues. Now, one could argue Illinois has been here 200 plus years, and we've got along without whatever is in all those 12, 15,000 bills that have been introduced since January of 2019.
Heck, we went 2 years without a budget. So.
More or less.
More or less.
And I said that because there were other things happening that some spending, even though it hadn't been appropriate, continued to occur. But the one thing, and that's a good point, the one thing that absolutely, I believe, has to be done is we have to enact a spending plan for the fiscal year that's going to begin on July 1.
Yeah. What do you do here in terms of, obviously there's this concern, and rightfully so. You don't want to be too alarmist about it, but you do have to be concerned, and folks want to take common sense precautions here. The experts, and Governor J.B. Pritzker has said, if you are within 6 feet of a contagious person and you spend 10 minutes, you could become infected yourself, which means that if one of us has the virus here by the end of this program, so you know, with that,
and it'd be worse for me than for you because I am a senior citizen and I'm also diabetic. So
I have asthma.
That doesn't count.
Okay.
No, but that's a good point, though. Yeah. How does the legislature do that? There's nothing in the Constitution that would allow them to meet other than in Springfield, other than in the legislative chambers. Now they can have committee meetings elsewhere.
Sure, and they do.
And they could do it through some kind of remote, through Skype or something like that for a committee hearing. But I don't know how you would do a session that way.
Well, there have been instances, perhaps rare, but they do, well, maybe not that rare. What's every end of session like? They hustle through a lot of bills in not very much time that have been worked on for some time. When they did the pension move a number of years ago, that was created, I believe, the two pension tiers. That was done, I believe, in the course of a day, so that there wasn't much chance for opposition to
and
surface.
in a sense that's true, but almost all the things that get put through at the last minute are things that people have been talking about for a long time. Sure. And it's just the nitty-gritty details that finally get worked out.
Right.
There's not very many major things that suddenly break and you just hear about them today in their past that afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering, and I would expect so, because we don't know how long this might go on. I mean, comparisons to 1918 are both apt and inapt. During that pandemic, it started in 1917, then it kind of went into a lull during the summer season, and then come fall of 1918, it came back even worse than before. So I guess what I'm thinking here is, will there be consideration to getting as much of this done remotely, getting that sort of talking that is always traditional before you get any kind of major legislation done. Let's get that done, decide what issues are absolutely critical, and the budget being, I think, probably priority one. Come to Springfield, get it out of the way, and get out of town as quickly as possible. Is that something that you think might happen or should be considered?
Well, I suppose it could, but at this point, it's really hard to make any kind of, what would you say, prediction with any degree of certainty, because there are just so many unknowns. Yeah. Now, the evidence is that South Korea has been able to tamp down the rate of infection, but they went into, they closed schools, I think, for a prolonged period of time, starting in February. Yeah. And so their curve is kind of eased out. Yeah. On the other hand, places like Italy, they didn't do anything. They're like this. Yeah. And so it's a matter, and I think we're sort of behind the eight ball because we don't know how many people have the coronavirus. We've tested maybe 11, 12,000, something like that. Yep. South Korea, and this is in the course of the thing, South Korea, according to the newspaper reports, is testing that many people every day. Yeah. Yeah. And so we don't know. We've not had, as we tape this, we've not had any reported cases in Sangamon County. On the other hand, there was a young woman who came home from Italy to O'Hare, got on Amtrak, came down to St. Louis, passing through Springfield. People got on and off at Springfield, including some students from Athens. Yes. How do we know whether or not one of those people may have been infected by her?
That's an excellent point.
Because the incubation period can be as long as 2 weeks. Yeah. Now, this just happened last week.
Correct. And I will say that I think overall the state, deserves high marks in getting information out for the most part. I think that with the situation of the train in Springfield, I was a bit disappointed because I wanted to know. This was announced by the Athens School District. We had 16 kids on that train. We've been in touch with the state health department. They said no cause for concern. The infected woman was on the business class car and she never left the business class car. The kids were on a different car and they never left that car, and so everybody's safe. My question would be, okay, was there anybody on the business class car that got off on Springfield? And I wasn't able to get an answer to that question. I was instead referred to the Missouri Department of Public Health, saying Missouri is handling the investigation.
Because she got off at St. Louis.
Yes, yeah. Which doesn't necessarily bolster one's faith.
Well, here's another question. Yeah. Presumably, every time I've ridden Amtrak, a conductor has come by to look at my tickets.
Correct.
Back in the old days, they punched them. Now they kind of scan them. Yeah. And so I'm assuming that they don't have separate conductors for business as compared to coach.
And would the conductor have been in the presence of the woman for long enough?
Well, yeah.
And so I guess, one thing that I think is probably critical here right now is getting as much information and accurate information out as possible. And I think that that's probably best for any level, but particularly the state. With that exception, I think they have been doing, I think a pretty good job. The governor's been having daily press briefings. He's the last one I watched, almost an hour, I believe, 40 plus minutes, and it seemed pretty thorough. And so I think that was a good idea. Very upset at Donald Trump and the federal government with regard to the testing. Not enough tests. It is publicly imploring the federal government to do better. I wonder how much of that is bona fide, genuine need. Clearly, there may, or is politics entering into that at all? Because Trump is taking a beating for his handling of the virus. Should we take what folks are saying about the federal government at face?
Well, I think the evidence suggests, and nobody has contradicted this as fact, that we did not have enough testing supplies on hand, and that we decided to develop our own tests rather than use ones off the shelf, so to speak, from the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
Now, that was a decision that was made, and in hindsight, I'm sure the people who made it would love to go back and say, yes, WHO, send us all the stuff you got. There was a story today about students from the University of Illinois who've been studying overseas, who came back. They were not tested. In Italy, in China, places like that, they came back and they weren't tested before they entered the U.S. Now, a more prudent approach would have been said, hey, you're coming back from Italy, let me get a quick swab so we can check on it.
Sure. But the time also to get these tests processed has also been a subject of some concern. It's apparently feasible to do in a fairly short time frame to get these results back, but there has been some concern that it's taking longer perhaps than it should. The Gates Foundation in Seattle has announced a plan that they're going to start providing tests and providing them to people in their homes, bypassing the government. I'm not sure where that is, but it was announced just a couple days ago in Seattle that that's one thing that might be tried.
Yeah, I think that the major concern is that if the infection rate in the U.S. mimics what the infection rate was in China, we may not even have enough hospital beds to take care of everyone.
Right.
And now some people have said, well, this is nothing like a bad case of the flu. But on the other hand, the mortality rate, and they don't know for sure what it is yet, but they're guessing maybe it could be 1%. And the mortality rate for flu is 0.1%. So that means this stuff is 10 times more deadly than flu.
I believe the Spanish influenza epidemic of 1918 was right around 2%, and that had two things going for it or against it, depending on your point of view. Extremely contagious, so lots of folks got it. So 2% of the infected folks, a huge number of people. And again, you don't want to be alarmist here, but you're right, Charlie. We don't know how many people we're talking about.
And you have to remember too, back at the time of World War I, we did not have the types of medicine that are available to deal with, for example, one of the conditions you can develop from these types of viruses is pneumonia.
Yes.
We have drugs that treat pneumonia now, which they didn't have back then.
Yeah.
Same thing for tuberculosis.
Yeah, sure. And the other thing they didn't have back then was the internet.
Or vaccines.
Or vaccines.
Because in my case, I get a flu shot every year. And I've done it for, 25 years. I've only been ill with the flu once, and it was relatively minor.
Yeah. Well, again, there's the way that information is disseminated is much different than it was back then. And I wonder in my own mind how much of that is good and how much of that there might be a part of it that's not so good in terms of rumors. But I have not seen a lot of things out there that seem unfounded in the realm of unfounded rumors, although I have heard that Fox folks and Rush Limbaugh have been saying this is a hoax. But aside from that, it seems like I think the media's comported itself pretty well.
Yeah, and in my case, what I would advise everyone to do is don't go to Facebook and see what somebody's nephew's best friend's kid said. Go to the Illinois Department of Public Health. Go to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. go to WHO, because you get legitimate information from there.
Yeah,
And you're not going to get it off somebody's Facebook post or somebody's tweet.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's absolutely, that's an excellent point, because the media has taken a black eye in recent years, and some folks, well, so we have social media. Why do we need folks who are actually professionals at asking questions and ferreting out the truth? This sort of a situation, I think, underscores why that's important, because we wouldn't know a lot of the things that we're talking about just now in terms of problems with testing and a rocky rollout here in the United States, absent the media and asking questions, and it didn't come from Facebook.
Yeah.
So, obviously this is having a huge economic effect on businesses, on individuals, but also on governments. I don't know that it's, certainly money isn't probably the most important thing right now, but money is important. What potential might this have? I'm wondering, we weren't in good shape on pensions before this happened. We can't be in better shape now.
Well, what it'll mean is that the investments that the pension funds make, from which they derive interest, which is it's one of the three legs for pensions, members' contributions, government employee contribution, the employer, and then earnings on investments. Well, the earnings on investments are certain to take a hit. And so that will have to be factored in when the determination is made, how much money does the state have to put in the 5 pension systems for which it's responsible, the biggest one being the teachers' retirement system that covers all the teachers except those in Chicago. How much are we going to have to put in? And it's probably going to be higher than what the original estimates were.
Yeah.
Or look at it another way. What happens when somebody who works at the Quincy Veterans Home tests positive? That would be a worst case scenario, because those veterans would be very susceptible to having dire consequences. Or what happens with a local hospital if some of their nurses have to self-quarantine?
Yeah.
You run out of adequate people. Or even the prisons. What would happen in the Illinois Corrections Department if we had positive cases in one of our overcrowded maximum security prisons?
In fact, I've asked that question just this afternoon of the Sangamon County Jail, not the state prison system, but certainly it's on the minds of local corrections officials.
Oh, sure.
And they have at any given time 320, 330 people booked in the Sangamon County Jail here. Right now, what they're doing is they're encouraging officers to issue notices to appear instead of booking folks if the situation merits. I don't think we're going to see anybody who's violent, come to court next Thursday and we'll talk about these murder charges. I think that's not going to happen, but otherwise they're trying to reduce head count going in. There's also been locally, the Convention and Visitors Bureau has ordered hand sanitizing pens for the upcoming conventions, of which there are no small number that were upcoming. And I talked to the director about 1 in the afternoon and saw him again at the city council meeting at 5, and he said, "You jinxed me." Right after you hung up, I got a call, back ordered, they're out. And I was wondering, they did apparently put the city logo on the pens. I don't know, it says Springfield Cares or Wash Your Hands, but he says it's a generic sort of thing so that we can store them for a while.
But there's be all these ramifications, and then in terms of the state's budget situation, you have to expect. There's been a lot written about what's going to happen in Chicago with conventions canceling at McCormick Place, the revenue that's going to be lost to the hotel industry, the entertainment industry, the bars.
How's that sports gambling working out these days?
Well, in sports gambling, there's not much to bet on.
Not much to bet on.
But all of that then would have an impact on the taxes that are collected.
Yes.
And I look back to what I guess would be the 2 major economic crashes that have occurred in this century. The first one was after the 9/11 attacks, and that knocked the bottom out of state revenues. And as a matter of fact, between 2002, because it occurred in September, which just was a couple months into fiscal 2002, and before we finally recovered 2 years later, the revenue loss was like $1.5 billion. And then when the banks, the financial system collapsed over that period, it was in excess of $2 billion that we lost.
Yeah.
And I remember George Ryan was trying to put together the budget for 2003, which was we're still feeling the aftermath of the recession and then the terrorist attack. And the legislature increased revenues through a variety of schemes by roughly $1 billion, and they still were $1 billion short, just because of the impact.
Yeah.
And there's a certain irony, and we were talking about this before we started the show. Last week, the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, which is the fiscal gurus for the General Assembly, they're like our version of the Congressional Budget Office, came out with a revenue update. And they were saying, well, here are the numbers that we thought were measuring the performance of the economy and the revenue system for this fiscal year, back in June, when we were putting the budget together. And here are our updated estimates based on what we've seen through February, the first, 2/3 of the fiscal year. Yeah. And so they said, and I'm going to read this because I think it's great. The estimate of net income taxes is being revised up $33 million from the enacted budget assumptions, while net personal income taxes are forecast to fall just shy. Net corporate income taxes are in a position to exceed previous assumptions. I'm not sure that net corporate returns are going to be in that same position.
It's the classic example of that was
sales taxes have somewhat outperformed expectations through February, and as a result of that positive growth, coupled with an updated outlook over the remaining third of the fiscal year, a net upward revision of $172 million is being made from earlier assumptions. And I'm thinking, talk about bad timing, because I don't think you could look and say, oh yeah, the corporate picture looks really great, and people are going to be spending a lot of money.
Look at all the sales taxes that are going to collect sales taxes on baseball tickets, maybe. So not on basketball tickets. I mean, the sporting thing alone.
And it's probably not so much the tickets as it is the beer that's going to be sold.
The beer,
No, and as a matter of fact, I believe, didn't the Illinois Liquor Commission change the rules so that taverns that were buying all kinds of booze for St. Patrick's Day can return the liquor to the distributor?
Icky. I'm not sure.
Well, no, I mean, it's unopened.
Unopened,
obviously. But
well, there you go. There's the price of oil. Just a couple, 3 weeks ago, we were hovering about $70 a barrel now. Checked yesterday, it's down to 35, something like that. Past the gas station, the good news is gas was down to $2.03 a gallon. The bad news is, I guess, we doubled the gas tax last year, and we might just remain almost in place, because if we're taxing whatever the per gallon cost is, actually the excise tax, I stand corrected. A gallon is a gallon. But you do have that potential that gas is cheap. That might help somewhat, but not. Other than that, I mean, trying to find silver linings is real hard.
Yeah, I'm not sure there really are that many.
Yeah. I'm wondering if this will help create a better leadership than we had before, better politics. When we get in this kind of a situation, and it is uncharted waters, we've never been here before. Will folks get along better than they used to, maybe, at the Capitol? Will partisanship be any different than it once was? Will it get worse? I mean, trying times, I think, sometimes create leaders or make leaders, good leadership, both important and visible.
And if I'm not mistaken, both parties in Congress worked together to put together a multi-billion, $8.5 billion package to help deal with the crisis. And they did it in congressional terms almost overnight, and the president signed it. So that was an example of people putting aside the partisan differences and the petty bickering
Right.
and deciding we have to work together
Sure.
for the good of the country and our constituents.
Yeah. I mean, how important, not that it's not unimportant, but how important now are these hearings, for example, on stuff like forming a legislative inspector general? Not, again, not an unimportant piece of business, but perhaps not now as important as some other things.
Well, as I said before, the only thing that absolutely has to get done, with maybe the qualification, I would have used to say with no doubt until we went through the Rauner years,
Yeah.
is they have to pass a budget.
Yeah.
But in terms of doing a lot of other important things, those things can wait until this epidemic is over, because it's not going to continue forever.
No, that's
And the president was right when he said that. But it is going to be trying for a couple months, maybe longer.
Yeah. Is it a good thing, you think, that this happened, if it had to happen in 2020, as opposed to, say, 2017, when we had Rauner in office?
Oh, at the state level?
Yeah.
No, I think that given the same situation, I think Bruce Rauner probably would have reacted the same way in terms of trying to get on top of it and deal with the issue.
Okay, fair enough. And with that, we're out of time. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week on Capitol View.